The first thing my father said when he saw my photo on the front page of the Washington Post wasn't, "I'm proud of you." It wasn't congratulations. It wasn't even, "How have you been?" Number. He stared at the picture of me standing beside a 4-star Air Force general inside the Pentagon, lowered the newspaper slowly onto the kitchen table, and said to my mother in the kind of voice people use when they realize they may have made a very expensive mistake, "How much money do you think she makes?" My mother went pale. 3 hours later, my phone rang for the first time in 8 months. "Emily," my father said carefully, "we need to talk. Family meeting tomorrow." I remember looking down at the screen in silence while rain slid against the windows of my apartment in Arlington. Outside, traffic crawled through the wet streets of Washington like veins pulsing beneath gray skin. Inside my apartment, everything was still except the ticking clock above the kitchen sink and the faint hum of my dryer running in the next room. Family meeting. The same family that once forgot my deployment date. The same family that laughed when I showed up to Thanksgiving in uniform because I had come straight from base. The same family that called me the government daughter like it was some kind of punchline. And suddenly, they wanted a meeting. I almost laughed. Instead, I told him I'll think about it. Then I hung up. But that wasn't where the story started. It started the week before when my mother looked me dead in the eyes and told me not to waste their time with my little soldier ceremony. And somehow, that hurt more than all the years before it. I'm Colonel Emily Carter, 34 years old, United States Air Force. Most people who meet me now assume I was born confident, disciplined, untouchable. That's the funny thing about uniforms. They make people think strength comes naturally. It doesn't. Sometimes strength is just humiliation that survived long enough to harden into silence. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, in a family that worshipped appearances. My father, Richard Carter, sold commercial insurance for 30 years and believed success should always be visible. Big house, loud opinions, expensive watch, country club membership. If people couldn't see your importance immediately, he assumed you didn't have any. My older brother Daniel inherited that trait like it was family jewelry. Daniel drove luxury cars he couldn't afford and talked about networking like he was running Wall Street instead of flipping half-empty condo units with borrowed money. My mother adored him. Even when he failed, she described it like temporary genius. "He's ambitious," she'd say proudly. Meanwhile, I joined the military at 19 because college wasn't financially realistic, and because secretly I wanted to leave home before I forgot who I was. My father never forgave me for it. "You're too smart for the military," he told me the day I enlisted. "That's where people go when they run out of options." I still remember standing in our driveway with my duffel bag while summer heat rose off the pavement in waves. I wanted him to hug me goodbye. Instead, he checked his watch. That became the pattern of our relationship. Every promotion I earned somehow became smaller when it entered their house. "Captain, that sounds administrative." "Major, so still not a real commander?" "Lieutenant Colonel, I can never keep track of those ranks." And whenever relatives asked what I did, my mother would wave her hand vaguely and say, "Emily works somewhere in military logistics." Somewhere, as if I stocked shelves in a warehouse. What none of them understood was that logistics in the military meant responsibility, pressure, lives. It meant 14-hour days coordinating emergency transport during hurricanes. It meant memorizing supply chains across continents. It meant making decisions while exhausted because people you would never meet depended on you getting things right. But families like mine don't respect invisible labor. They respect status they can brag about at dinner parties. The call about the Pentagon ceremony came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing transportation readiness reports at Andrews Air Force Base. I answered expecting another scheduling update. Instead, a senior general's office informed me I'd been selected for a distinguished service recognition tied to Operation Iron Harbor, a multinational emergency deployment mission we'd coordinated the previous year after catastrophic flooding overseas. The operation had nearly collapsed 3 times. For 11 days, I slept less than 20 hours total while managing cargo reroutes, medical airlift coordination, and equipment transfers through 6 different countries. When it was over, nobody outside the military knew my name. That was normal. But now apparently someone high above me had noticed. The ceremony would take place at the Pentagon the following Friday. For almost an hour after the call, I debated whether to invite my parents. I should have known better. Still, some stupid little part of me, the 19-year-old girl standing in that driveway with a duffel bag, wanted them there. Wanted them to finally see me. So that evening I called. My mother answered on the 3rd ring while some television show played loudly in the background. "Emily, everything okay?" I got invited to a recognition ceremony at the Pentagon next Friday, I said carefully. I thought maybe you and Dad would want to come. Silence. Then a small laugh. Not cruel at first. Just dismissive. A ceremony for what? It's for Operation Iron Harbor. Oh. Another pause. Honey, aren't those military events kind of boring? I felt my grip tighten on the phone. It's important to me. Before she could answer, my father's voice echoed faintly in the background. Who is it? Emily. What does she want? She invited us to some military thing. I heard him scoff. Then my mother came back on the line, her tone changing into that familiar sweetness people use when they think they're being reasonable. Emily, sweetheart, you're just a low-ranking soldier. Don't make us waste time driving all the way to D.C. for some meaningless ceremony. Low-ranking soldier. At 34 years old? After 15 years of service? For a second I couldn't speak. Then my father shouted loudly enough for me to hear without speakerphone. Tell her to call us when she becomes a general. My chest tightened so suddenly it almost felt physical. Not anger. Not yet. Something older than anger. Something heavier. I looked around my apartment after the call ended. The framed commendations on the wall, the deployment coins on my bookshelf, the folded flag inside the glass case near my desk. An entire life. And somehow to them I was still a disappointment wearing camouflage. That night I barely slept. By morning something inside me had gone quiet. Not broken. Just finished. Finished trying to earn affection from people who treated love like a performance review. Friday arrived cold and bright. Washington carried that sharp winter air that makes every breath feel cleaner than it really is. Black SUVs lined the Pentagon entrance while officers in dress uniforms crossed the courtyard with measured precision. I stood alone near the security checkpoint adjusting my service jacket while sunlight flashed across the silver eagle on my shoulder. No family. No congratulations. Just me. Oddly enough, that made breathing easier. As I walked toward the entrance, I caught my reflection briefly in the dark glass doors. For the first time in years, I stopped wishing my parents could see what I saw. A woman who had built herself from nothing they ever gave her. And as the Pentagon rose around me like a fortress of steel and history, I quietly told myself something I should have admitted long ago. For once, I was done begging to be seen. The Pentagon has a certain sound when you walk through it in dress uniform. Leather soles against polished floors. Quiet conversations cut short when senior officers pass. The distant hum of security doors opening and closing. Everything controlled. Everything measured. I had spent years inside military facilities, but that morning felt different. Not because I was nervous. Because for the first time in my career, people kept stopping me to say thank you. A colonel from Transportation Command shook my hand outside the corridor leading to the ceremony hall. Heard what you did during Iron Harbor, he said. A lot of people made it home because you kept that operation alive. I nodded politely, but his words stayed with me. A lot of people made it home. That was the thing civilians rarely understood about military logistics. Nobody noticed us when we succeeded. But if we failed, people died quietly and far away from cameras. The ceremony room itself wasn't enormous. No dramatic movie-style ballroom. Just a formal Pentagon conference hall with rows of seats, American flags positioned with mathematical precision, and senior officers moving through the crowd with restrained authority. I found my assigned seat near the front. Colonel Carter. I turned and saw Brigadier General Howard Reeves approaching me with an easy smile. I recognized him immediately. He'd overseen part of the European coordination during Iron Harbor. Sir. At ease, he said softly. You look surprised to be here. A little, sir? He laughed quietly. That means you're probably the right person for the award. Then his expression shifted. Most people in this building know Iron Harbor almost collapsed halfway through. I remembered that night instantly. 3 countries refusing clearance approval. Weather shutting down routes. Medical shipments stranded overseas. 47 minutes from complete operational failure. I had stood in a temporary command room at Ramstein Air Base with bloodshot eyes and coffee-stained paperwork, while half the senior staff argued over protocol. And eventually I'd ignored protocol. I rerouted aircraft without waiting for full authorization. Risked my career. Saved the mission. General Reeves lowered his voice slightly. You made decisions most officers would have been too afraid to make. Sir, I just did my job. No, he said firmly, you did more than that. Before I could respond, another officer approached him and he gave me one final nod before walking away. I sat there afterward staring at the folded program in my lap. For years, my family had reduced my career to jokes about paperwork and uniforms. Meanwhile, strangers inside the Pentagon understood exactly what I had carried. The ceremony began promptly at 10. Medals, citations, formal introductions. Then my name was called. Colonel Emily Carter. I stood, smoothed my jacket instinctively, and walked toward the stage beneath the bright overhead lights. The room blurred slightly around the edges the way it always did during emotionally significant moments. Not panic, just adrenaline narrowing the world. I remember hearing fragments as the citation was read aloud. Exceptional leadership. Critical international coordination. Directly responsible for successful medical evacuation operations. Saved countless civilian and military lives. Then came the handshake. General Thomas Whitaker, 4-Star Air Force Command. A man whose face appeared regularly on national news. He held my hand firmly and looked directly at me before leaning closer. The military needs more officers like you, Colonel. Simple sentence. But after a lifetime of being treated invisible by my own family, those words landed somewhere deep. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the room. And for the first time since I joined the Air Force, I allowed myself one dangerous thought. Maybe I had finally become someone impossible to dismiss. After the ceremony ended, several journalists from military publications gathered near the reception area. Normally, I avoided media attention whenever possible, but protocol required brief interviews. One reporter asked, "What motivated you during Iron Harbor?" I answered honestly. People were depending on us. Once you understand that clearly enough ego disappears, you just focus on bringing everyone home. Another asked whether leadership came naturally to me. I almost laughed. No, I said. Leadership usually comes from surviving difficult people. The reporter smiled politely, assuming I meant military pressure. I let him believe that. By late afternoon, I returned to my apartment exhausted but strangely calm. The city outside glowed gold beneath the setting sun while traffic rolled slowly past the Potomac. I changed out of my uniform, carefully hanging the jacket with practiced precision before loosening my collar and sitting on the couch in silence. No celebration dinner, no family waiting, just quiet. Honestly, I preferred it that way. Around 7 that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from an old family friend named Carol Simmons. "Saw your photo online. Your parents must be so proud." I stared at the message for several seconds before setting the phone face down on the table. That word again. Proud. People assumed parents naturally became proud once success became visible enough. They didn't understand that some families resent your success more than your failure, especially when your success exposes how badly they underestimated you. The next morning, everything exploded. I woke to 17 missed calls, 3 voicemails, 9 text messages. My first thought was that something terrible had happened. Then I opened one of the messages from my cousin Natalie. "Emily, are you at the Pentagon right now?" Underneath it was a photograph. The Washington Post. Front section. And there I was, standing beside General Whitaker in full dress uniform, while both of us faced the cameras beneath the Pentagon seal. The headline read, "Colonel Emily Carter honored for strategic leadership during international crisis response." Colonel, not low-ranking soldier. Not Emily who works somewhere in logistics. Colonel Emily Carter. I sat very still at the edge of my bed while sunlight spilled across the hardwood floor. Then my phone rang again. Dad. I let it ring twice before answering. His voice sounded different immediately. Careful. Measured. The way people speak when they suddenly realize they may not fully understand the person on the other end. Emily. Dad. Long pause. We saw the article. I figured. Another pause. Your parents spend your entire childhood teaching you to recognize emotional shifts in their voices. Even after years apart, I could hear everything underneath his silence. Confusion. Embarrassment. Calculation. You never told us, he began slowly. Told you what? That you were, he hesitated, important. I nearly smiled at that word. Important. As if value only became real after newspapers printed it. I tried inviting you to the ceremony. That's not what I mean. Of course it wasn't. Because what bothered him wasn't missing the event. It was discovering other people respected me more than he did. Behind him, I could hear my mother speaking rapidly in the background. Ask her if that general knows senators. Richard, ask her if she's on television again tonight. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was. Not love. Opportunity. My father cleared his throat. Your mother and I think maybe we should all sit down together. Why? We're family. Funny how that word only appeared when my status became useful. I walked toward the kitchen window while holding the phone. Outside, Arlington moved normally beneath gray skies. Joggers passed on sidewalks. Cars stopped at intersections. Somewhere in the distance, a siren echoed faintly. Ordinary life continuing while my family suddenly rewrote who they thought I was. "We need to talk," my father said again. "Family meeting tomorrow." I leaned one shoulder against the window frame. 8 months earlier, I'd called home during Christmas leave. Nobody answered because Daniel had apparently rented a lake house for the family and forgotten to mention the trip to me. Now they wanted a meeting, because a newspaper told them I mattered. When I asked quietly, relief flooded his voice immediately. "Tomorrow afternoon, 2 o'clock. I'll see if I can make it. Emily," his tone softened carefully, "we're proud of you." The words should have meant something. Instead, they felt late. Very late. After we hung up, I stood motionless in my kitchen for a long time. Then I walked into my spare room and unlocked a small black fireproof box inside the closet. Folders. Financial documents, wire transfer records, medical payment receipts, 12 years of secrets. I carried one black folder back to the kitchen table and opened it slowly. Every hidden thing I'd done for them sat inside those pages. Things they never noticed, never questioned, never thanked me for. And as rain began tapping softly against the windows again, I realized something with absolute clarity. Tomorrow wasn't going to be a reunion. It was going to be an awakening. My parents' house looked smaller than I remembered. Not physically. Emotionally. The white colonial home in Richmond had once felt enormous when I was a child. A place where every room carried rules, expectations, tensions you learned to navigate quietly if you wanted peace. But when I pulled into the driveway the next afternoon, the house suddenly looked like what it really was. A carefully maintained shell full of people terrified of appearances cracking. My father's BMW sat in the driveway beside Daniel's black Range Rover, the one he absolutely could not afford. Fresh mulch had been spread around the flower beds recently. My mother always panic cleaned when she wanted to impress people. Apparently now I qualified as people. I stayed in the car for almost a minute after turning off the engine. Rain clouds hung low over Richmond, heavy and gray, making the neighborhood feel muted. I could see movement through the front curtains. They were watching for me. That alone almost made me laugh. When I was younger, they never watched for me. Not after deployments. Not after training exercises. Not even after my first overseas assignment. But today they were waiting at the window. I stepped out wearing civilian clothes instead of my uniform dark jeans, black coat hair tied neatly back. I'd considered arriving in dress blues, then decided against it. I didn't need the uniform anymore. The newspaper had already done the talking for me. Before I even reached the porch, the front door swung open. "Emily," my mother said brightly. Too brightly. She moved toward me quickly, arms half open, as if we were the kind of family that hugged naturally. I noticed the slight hesitation when I didn't immediately move closer, so she awkwardly touched my arm instead. "You made it." "Looks that way." Behind her, my father appeared in the hallway wearing one of his expensive golf sweaters. Daniel stood farther back near the dining room entrance, holding a coffee mug. All three of them looked at me differently now. Not warmer, just more careful. Like investors studying a stock they may have underestimated. Dad stepped forward first. "You look good." "I'm alive, that usually helps." He forced a chuckle. No one else laughed. The smell inside the house hit me immediately, coffee lemon furniture polish and the faint scent of my mother's vanilla candles. The exact same smell from 20 years ago. Funny how memory works. Sometimes scent travels deeper than emotion. "Come sit," Mom said quickly. I made lunch. Of course she had. Because now there was something to gain from hospitality. We moved into the dining room where the table had been fully set like it was Thanksgiving instead of a tense family meeting nobody wanted to define honestly. Daniel leaned back in his chair with an uncomfortable smile. "So, Colonel Carter." There was teasing in his tone, but weaker than before. I sat across from him calmly. "Still sounds strange when you say it." His jaw tightened slightly. "Good." For years, Daniel had treated me like background noise at family gatherings. He interrupted me, constantly mocked military life, once asked whether I was basically a glorified airport manager. Now suddenly he couldn't maintain eye contact. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, first things first." He folded his hands together. "Your mother and I want to say we're proud of you." There it was again. That word. Proud. I looked at him carefully. When did that start? Silence settled heavily across the table. My mother jumped in too quickly. "Oh, Emily, don't do that." "Do what?" "Be difficult." I almost smiled. Interesting. They had ignored me for years, but the moment I stopped pretending not to notice, I became difficult. Dad exhaled slowly. We didn't realize how significant your role was. You didn't ask. That's not fair. No, I leaned back slightly. You called my Pentagon ceremony meaningless. Mom looked embarrassed for exactly 2 seconds before defensiveness returned. Well, we thought you were exaggerating. That sentence landed harder than she intended. Because she truly meant it. My own family genuinely believed I wasn't capable of becoming important. Daniel rubbed his neck awkwardly. To be fair, Em, you never talked much about your career. I looked directly at him. Every time I tried, you changed the subject back to yourself. His face reddened immediately. Dad cut in before Daniel could answer. The point is, things are different now. And there it was. The real conversation finally entering the room. Different now. Not because they suddenly loved me more. Because my value had changed. I stayed quiet and let him continue. He glanced briefly toward my mother before speaking carefully. Your article opened some doors. What kind of doors? Well, he shifted in his chair. People pay attention to military leadership, government connections, influence. I could almost hear the script forming in his head. Mom reached for her coffee cup. Your cousin Natalie said you probably know senators now. Of course she did. I stared at them for several seconds. Then I asked quietly, why am I really here? Nobody answered immediately. Daniel looked down at the table. That told me everything. Finally, Dad sighed heavily. Daniel's company has been struggling. There it was. The truth. Daniel sat up defensively. The market shifted. No, I said calmly. You over-leveraged bad properties during inflated pricing. His eyes snapped toward me. You don't know anything about real estate. No, but I know how numbers work. Dad raised a hand quickly. Emily, we're just asking for guidance. What kind of guidance? Another pause. Then my father said the sentence I had expected from the moment the phone rang yesterday morning. We were hoping maybe you could help. Not emotionally, financially, socially, strategically. Whatever benefited them most. Mom leaned forward with sudden enthusiasm. You probably know people in Washington, important people. I laughed softly before I could stop myself. That seemed to offend her. What's funny? You still don't care what I actually do. Dad frowned. That's not true. Really, I opened my bag slowly and removed the black folder. Then let's test that. The room changed immediately. My father stared at the folder. What's that? I placed it carefully on the table between us. 12 years. Daniel frowned. What? 12 years of things none of you noticed. I opened the folder. The first paper was a bank statement. My mother looked confused until I slid it toward her. Then her face drained of color. That's... Her voice faltered. Our mortgage account. Yes. Dad grabbed the paper. I watched realization begin creeping slowly across his face. Monthly payments. Anonymous transfers. Dates stretching back years. His eyes widened. What is this? The house almost went into foreclosure in 2015, I said quietly. You remember that? Nobody spoke. Of course they remembered. Dad had blamed the economy for months afterward. What you didn't know, I continued, was that the bank received enough money to stop the process 2 days before legal seizure. Mom stared at me. I nodded once. Daniel shook his head slowly. That's impossible. No, what's impossible is believing nobody in this family ever wondered how things magically worked out. I pulled out another document. Hospital payment records. My mother's surgery from 3 years earlier. The insurance gap they thought had mysteriously disappeared. Dad's hands actually trembled now. You paid for this. For all of it. Silence. Heavy. Humiliating silence. I looked at each of them carefully before speaking again. For 12 years, the low-ranking soldier you were embarrassed by quietly kept this family financially alive. Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. My father looked older suddenly. Smaller. We didn't know. The words came out cracked and weak. And for the first time in my life, I finally said the thing sitting inside me for years. You never cared enough to know. Mom's eyes filled instantly. Daniel looked physically sick. But I wasn't angry anymore. That was the strange part. Anger requires hope. And somewhere over the years, hope had simply worn out. Dad swallowed hard. Emily, we're family. I closed the folder slowly. No, I said softly. Family doesn't wait for newspapers to tell them someone matters. Then I stood. Nobody tried to stop me immediately. I think they were too stunned. At the front door, I finally heard my father's voice behind me. Small. Fragile. Emily. I turned slightly. For a moment he looked less like the intimidating man from my childhood, and more like an aging father realizing too late that he had spent years looking past his own daughter. I really didn't know he whispered. I held his gaze. I know. Then I walked out into the cold Virginia rain and closed the door behind me. For 3 days after I left my parents' house, nobody called. Not my mother. Not Daniel. Not my father. That silence should have felt peaceful, but it didn't. It followed me around my apartment like a second shadow. I would be making coffee before sunrise and suddenly I'd hear my father's voice in my head. I really didn't know. I believed him. That was the worst part. He really hadn't known. Not because the truth had been hidden too well, but because I had been hidden in plain sight. At work, I buried myself in routine. Reports, briefings, budget reviews, meetings where people used words like readiness posture and deployment windows with the seriousness of surgeons discussing vital organs. Military life had a mercy to it when the mission started. Your feelings had to stand quietly in the hallway and wait. But they never left. On the 4th day, my phone began vibrating while I was leaving base. Daniel. I watched his name flash across the screen until the call disappeared. Then it came again. And again. By the time I reached my car, he had left a voicemail. I played it only after sitting behind the wheel with the door shut. Look, I don't know what Dad told you, but things are bad. Really bad. I've got people breathing down my neck, and if this company collapses, Mom and Dad are going to get dragged into it too. I know we've had our issues, but you have connections now. You can make one call. One call, Emily. He paused, breathing hard. Then his voice sharpened. Don't punish everyone just because you're mad. I deleted the message. Not because it didn't hurt. Because it sounded exactly like him. Daniel never asked forgiveness before asking for help. He simply placed his emergency in your lap and acted offended if you refused to carry it. That evening my mother texted, "Honey, your brother is under terrible stress. Please don't turn your back on family now." I stared at the word family until the letters stopped looking real. Family? The same word they used to excuse neglect. The same word they used to demand sacrifice. The same word they never seemed to apply when I was the one standing alone. I didn't answer. A week later, Richard Carter came to Arlington. No warning. No appointment. Just a quiet knock at my apartment door at 7:16 on a Thursday evening. When I opened it, my father stood in the hallway wearing a wool coat and holding his hat in both hands. He looked tired. Not dramatic, not broken in some theatrical way. Just tired like a man who had driven 90 miles with too many thoughts and no good ones. "Emily," he said. I didn't invite him in immediately. He noticed. His eyes lowered for a second. "I know I should have called. Yes, I wanted to see you. I almost said why now, but I already knew why. So I stepped aside." He entered slowly as if crossing into unfamiliar territory. In a way he was. My father had never visited my apartment before. He had never asked what it looked like, never wondered where I spent my evenings, never seen the life I built after leaving his house. His eyes moved across the room. The framed commendation near the bookshelf. The photograph of my unit in Germany. The folded flag in the glass case that belonged to Master Sergeant Elaine Brooks, my first mentor who died of cancer 5 years after retirement and had no children of her own. She'd left it to me because, in her words, I was stubborn enough to understand what it meant. Dad stopped in front of that case. Whose flag? Someone who treated me like family. The sentence landed quietly, but I saw it hit him. He looked away. For a while, neither of us spoke. I made coffee because silence needed something ordinary inside it. My father sat at my small kitchen table, hands wrapped around the mug, though he didn't drink. "This is a nice place," he said finally. "It's mine." He nodded. I knew he heard the second meaning. Mine, not yours, not Daniel's, not something I built to impress you. "I drove past the Pentagon on the way here," he said. I'd never been that close. I leaned against the counter. "It's just a building." "No," he said quietly, "it isn't." That surprised me. He stared into his coffee like the answer might be floating there. I spent my life thinking success had a certain look. A firm handshake, a nice car, people laughing at your jokes because they needed something from you. A faint, bitter smile crossed his face. "I thought Daniel had it. I thought you were hiding from the real world." I said nothing. He looked up at me then, and for the first time I could remember, my father didn't seem to be performing authority. He just looked old. I was wrong. Those 3 words should have felt satisfying. They didn't. They felt late, like flowers sent to a house after everyone had moved away. "Daniel wants me to help," I said. "I know." So do you? His face tightened. A part of me did. At least it was honest. And now, he looked toward the flag case again. Now I think saving him one more time might be the cruelest thing anyone could do. That was the first decent thing he'd said in years. I folded my arms not defensively but to keep myself steady. I'm cutting off everything. The transfers, the medical gaps, the emergency payments, all of it. He closed his eyes briefly. My voice stayed calm. I won't use my name, my rank, or my reputation to rescue Daniel's business. I won't call senators, I won't pressure anyone. And I won't be the family bank anymore. When he opened his eyes, they were wet, not enough to spill over, but enough. I understand. No, I said, you accept it. Understanding may take longer. He flinched slightly but nodded. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue. The old Richard Carter would have. He would have called me cold, ungrateful, dramatic. He would have reminded me who paid for my braces, who kept a roof over my head, who taught me to ride a bike on a cracked suburban sidewalk. But this man stayed quiet. Maybe that was his first attempt at respect. When he finally stood to leave, it had started raining outside. The same soft Virginia rain that seemed to appear every time my life changed shape. At the door, he turned back. I thought success looked different, he said. I held the door open. That's because you only respected what people could brag about at dinner. His jaw worked once like he'd swallowed something sharp. Then he nodded. Outside, he stepped into the hallway, paused, and looked at me one last time. Not at my apartment. Not at the awards. At me. I'm sorry, Emily. I wanted that to fix something. I really did. But some apologies arrive carrying no tools. They can stand beside the damage, but they can't rebuild the house. I know, I said. He walked away slowly, and as I closed the door, I realized my revenge had never been about destroying them. It was this: letting them live without the daughter they only valued after losing access to her. A year later, my name appeared in the news again. Not the front page this time. Just a small military publication article most people would never read unless they already cared about that world. There was a photograph of me standing at a podium during a leadership symposium at Joint Base Andrews, speaking to a room full of young officers. The headline read, Colonel Emily Carter launches mentorship initiative for first-generation military leaders. I didn't send the article to my family. I didn't need to. By then, silence had become easier. Not painless. Just easier. Daniel's company collapsed in early spring. I heard about it from my cousin Natalie, who sent one careful text that began with, I don't want to get involved, but I thought you should know. That was how family gossip always arrived. Wrapped in fake concern delivered with perfect aim. Daniel lost the Range Rover first. Then the office downtown. Then the house he had insisted was an investment property with lifestyle flexibility, which was just his way of saying he couldn't afford it. My mother called twice after that. I didn't answer. She left one voicemail that lasted nearly 4 minutes. I listened to half of it while sitting in my car outside base. Her voice trembled, but not in the way I used to imagine when I was younger. Back then, I thought if my mother ever cried over me, it would feel like proof that I mattered. Instead, it sounded complicated. Emily, I know things haven't been easy between us, she said. But Daniel is still your brother. Your father barely sleeps. This whole situation has been very hard on everyone. Everyone. That was the part that made me press stop. Because even after everything, she still could not say what had been hard on me. That night, I deleted the voicemail and slept 6 straight hours for the first time in weeks. Healing didn't feel like fireworks. It felt like no longer explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. My father was different. He didn't call often, maybe once every 2 months, sometimes less. The calls were short, quiet, almost formal. How are you, he would ask. Busy, I'd say. Are you eating? Yes. Good. At first, I assumed he was building toward another request. He wasn't. That made the calls stranger. Then one afternoon in October, a letter arrived at my apartment. Real paper, cream envelope, my name written in my father's careful handwriting. I stood near the mailboxes for several seconds before opening it. Inside was one folded sheet. No long speech. No demand. No guilt. Just a few lines. Emily, I spent your whole life waiting for you to become someone important. I never realized you already were. I am sorry I made you prove what I should have known. Dad. I read it twice. Then a third time. The hallway around me blurred slightly, but I didn't cry. Not the way people expect in stories. There was no dramatic breakdown, no collapse against the wall. I simply folded the letter carefully and carried it upstairs. For 3 days it sat on my kitchen table beside my keys. I would glance at it in the morning while drinking coffee, see it again at night when I came home exhausted. Each time I felt something shift inside me, not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the first honest shape of grief. Because that was what people rarely told you. Sometimes when your family finally admits the truth, it doesn't erase the pain. It confirms it. It tells the younger version of you, the one who waited in driveways and airport terminals and quiet holiday corners, that she wasn't imagining it. She really had been overlooked. She really had been wounded. And she really had survived. The following month, I attended a military memorial service at Arlington National Cemetery. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. Rows of white headstones stretched across the hills like silent witnesses. A bugle played in the distance, its notes thin and aching under the pale winter sky. After the service, a young lieutenant approached me near the path. She couldn't have been more than 24. Dark hair pulled into a strict bun, dress uniform immaculate, eyes trying very hard not to look lost. "Colonel Carter." "Yes," she swallowed. "I heard you speak at Andrews, about leading when your family doesn't understand your service." I waited. Her hands tightened around her gloves. "My father thinks I'm wasting my life." There it was, the same old wound wearing a younger face. I looked at her, and for a moment I saw myself at 19 standing in my parents' driveway, with a duffel bag waiting for a hug that never came. So I said the thing no one had said to me then. Your life does not become smaller because someone else refuses to recognize its size. Her eyes filled, but she nodded quickly, trying to stay composed. I smiled gently. You don't have to convince everyone you matter. Just make sure you never forget it yourself. She thanked me and walked away toward the parking area, shoulders just a little straighter. That was when I understood what the real ending was. It wasn't my father's apology. It wasn't Daniel losing everything. It wasn't my mother finally realizing the daughter she dismissed had been holding the family together all along. The real ending was this. I had become the person I needed when I was younger. And maybe that was better than revenge. Months later, my father asked if he could attend one of my public ceremonies. I thought about saying no. The old part of me wanted to. But another part, older and calmer now, understood that boundaries didn't always require locked doors. Sometimes they required open doors with clear lines painted on the floor. So I said, you can come, but you come as a guest, not as someone owed a place. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I understand. This time I believed he was beginning to. At the ceremony, he sat in the second row, alone. No mother, no Daniel, no performance. When my name was called, I walked across the stage beneath the bright lights, accepted the citation, shook hands with another general, and turned toward the audience. My father was standing, not clapping wildly, not trying to draw attention, just standing straight, one hand pressed over his heart. For once he saw me, just not soon enough to be the reason I became strong, and maybe that was okay. Because I had stopped needing my family to prove my worth. I had already lived it. If this story touched something in you, I'd like to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and whether you've ever had to become strong without the support you deserved. There are more stories like this waiting for you every day, so subscribe and stay with us for the next one. Sometimes the people who were overlooked the longest are the ones with the most powerful stories to tell.